Peter Broley from Primary Sales in WA is leading this project for us. So he's been a really big help in putting together a lot of the stories around harvest losses, and he's going to take us through now just a short background as to why you should be measuring, because if we can't measure the losses, we can't manage the losses. So if you get them in the front of your machine and you're putting them through out the back, what's the worst of it? You're spending that much money on your rear, you're spending that much money on fertiliser, you're calibrating your seeders, you're doing everything right. If you're not measuring your harvest losses, you're not maximising your profit. So Peter's just going to run through a few stories of some people who have made some pretty easy changes and really maximise their profit at harvest, and then we'll move from there into some more technical information on how you can set your fronts up, and then into rotor losses and threshing area losses.
Okay, guys, thanks very much, Tom. I really appreciate the time to have a chat. How's the sound, Tom? Is it okay?
Yeah, mate.
All good. Excellent. Look, guys, what we want to do is a intro into why we're doing harvest loss measurement and why that's important. And you're going to have chats with Cassie and Brett Asper, who will be along shortly. And also we'll look at the rotor loss and sieve area and what we can do. And really the key here is sharing ideas and starting a conversation around this. Some of the stories we're going to go through are going to relate to some growers and what they've done, what they've experienced. But I think the people you're sitting next to you, your peers, are going to give you some of the best ideas of what they've done locally, because some of the things that are tried that Ben's going to go through with front loss may not work in your area, but have worked elsewhere, or haven't worked in other areas, but work with your crops, your paddocks, and will help increase your profitability overall. And I guess that's the real driver of what we're doing here. What you've got up on the screen there is Pete Newman. He was, I guess he's probably one of the leaders, certainly one of our leaders who's been out there doing work on harvest loss. He did a project with GRDC, and that was back in 2018, looking at harvest loss, and probably highlighted to us all the significance of what we're losing there in canola alone in Western Australia, where I am today. There was $94 million worth of losses being left on the ground. That's back in 2018 prices, so you can imagine what that would be today. Just phenomenal. But look, might start with just getting a bit of a show of hands, Tom, of who's measuring losses right now and how they're doing it.
That's right. So it's important to understand how you're doing it as well. Who's just having a look behind the header when they're setting up at the start of the day? They're just having a look around on the ground, seeing what's there. Yep. No, that's one thing. Who's trying to trade? Is anyone putting a tray out, calibrated tray, drop tray, something like the bushel plus system we've got outside here? Yep. John? You others? Jono? Of course. Is anyone just going behind with a tray they've made up on a stick or something like that? They're trying to go a bit of stuff with? Yep. Well, it's all good things. Peter will go through now some of the. Most people are having a look, Peter. Some people are measuring. So
that's good. That's good.
The importance of those calibrated trays in reality, and understanding where you're losing your grain from. So
yeah, I understand that was a game changer for us.
Oh, mate,
I had a thing on a stick, and all that sort of nonsense we're mucking around. And until we actually got that tray, that magnetic drop tray, I just really didn't have much idea.
So before Pete starts, Marcel Cringe, who made the bushel plus system out the back here, there's a driver for him, and tell me if I'm wrong here, Pete, I think it's the story, right? The driver for Marcel making those automatic drop trays was he had blokes running behind the header with pans on sticks, and pans on sticks end up in the ground and end up, that's how little blokes, stabbing himself right in the guts, stop falling over, run behind the header. So it's not much fun. It starts in as dangerous and it's dirty work, and those things make it safe, easy, and efficient, and they make it so you can calibrate your harvester to within, milligrams to the square meter. So people go on.
Tom's absolutely right. That's why we start with fires. The safety of your team and yourselves is critical here. What Marcel did was to focus first on safety, and then try to provide a tool that can enable growers to be able to measure effectively, so that when you make changes, you can see what the impact is and then make a proactive change. So a good example of that is another grower up in Lake Bolac, not far from you guys, down south from you, he was in a 3-ton crop. And in that 3-ton crop, the first measure was losing around 3%, about 90 kilograms in that canola. And just by changing a single setting, that went down from 3 to 1.4%. Now that in their program that year, which was last year, that was a change for them of about $22,000. So that's a significant number alone with that. And I think that's really what I emphasize here, and what Cassie and Brett will talk about is it's spending that time to understand your harvester and making that small changes that will have that dramatic effect. So the Morawa example there, it's a green header where they did not know what they were losing. And Marcel and Pete Newms were out doing measures. First measure showed they were losing a phenomenal amount of grain out the back. Just by doing 2 changes, so dropping the fan speed initially, and then doing as Cassie reminds us, sometimes doing the reverse of what you think should happen, but doing the reverse and increasing it back again, they actually managed to save there somewhere in the order of $58,000 on that program, just by those 2 changes. So that's like half an hour, getting the chaser bin driver involved in doing that test while the header driver just keeps going. And not dissimilar in Hopetoun, north of you guys. Again, another large number in terms of losses that they saw, this time though in wheat. And I guess that's probably what I want to try and emphasize here is we think it's only canola, but I can tell you that when we go out and test, and anybody who's interested, you got Brian Legg there. If you want him to come and chat and come and do some tests with you, he'll be more than happy to, because he can show you that it doesn't matter whether it's barley or wheat, wherever it is, we can't see it if we're scratching behind. And in this case, we can see a significant difference there of a $203 per hour saving on that program that grower achieved. And that takes me to that story on barley, where a grower was knowing they were wanting to change what they were doing. They were tweeting at the @harvestloss app. So there's a handle on Twitter we really want to encourage you to go to. And Tom, I don't know whether we want to put some of the fire resources up through there as well, maybe later. But this grower went out with their old settings. They were using the previous year in barley, and they were leaving 500 kilograms of loss there. And that was just phenomenal amount of loss. But what was key was they sent those tweets to say, look, can I get better here? They got it down to 156. And they said, look, is that suffice? And then Newms said, look, you know what you should be moving to, just you need to go lower. And after a couple more attempts, he got it down to less than 20 kilograms. And that just shows you what a dramatic change was possible. But they had a benchmark to get towards. I guess that sort of leads to, what do we think is acceptable losses? Guys, what's an acceptable loss in canola for you guys? Who's doing canola, and who? Tom, give us some numbers.
Depends on the weather forecast.
Depends on the weather forecast. Yeah, absolutely right. We're in canola now, Pete. The rain's here. John, what are you working towards in terms of your losses in your measurement?
Oh, well, I was sitting at 1.5% or sort of a mark.
1.5% in canola.
Yeah.
Any of your cereals?
We can't. We sort of focus on the canola more because of the loss of it.
And in the last couple of years around here as well, the grain size has been pretty uniform. It's been pretty heavy grain, so it's actually been pretty good in terms of harvest losses. But yeah, for canola, we say 1 to 3% is a good benchmark to work towards if you can get it. But Jono's absolutely right, and that sometimes you have to change your thinking in terms of what your management is. So if you're looking at the weather that's coming in, you should be able to bump it up, and then that's acceptable. If you take an acceptable loss to get it off in time, John, then that's fine. As long as you understand in your head what the acceptable loss is. So understand what you are losing to make that conscious choice to say, I'll bump it up, I'll get off before the rain comes. As long as you know then that you're making a choice that's affecting your profitability, then that's fine.
As long as you're measuring. So a quick story of a New Zealand farmer who was really very much focused on his small grains and achieved an amazing result with his small grain and his cereals. He said, "Oh, look, I think we're doing pretty well in our cereals, what our losses were." And he was right. He knew what those losses were. And he said, "Look, I was pretty happy with what the loss rate was, but what he found was he could actually speed up." So he said, "I actually saved days in my harvest because what I did was I increased my speed by what was around 20%. That's a significant number that allows you to make those calls, but you know what it's going to be, not just going, I'll push forward. It's going, well, I can push forward and go faster because I know I'm actually still able to get that performance and productivity. And that's what this is about. It's not just about loss, it's about productivity that turns into profitability. You've got to be measuring in the right places. So what I'm showing you there on screen is the little red blocks are working from left to right. You've got measurement on the header front there. Then you've got the feeder house, and then you've got the axle. So putting these drop pans, whether you're using the Bushel Plus or whether you're using drop trays from Rob Gribble, or whether you're using your Bunnings trays or other ones that are available, whatever you're using, these are the spots you want to try and measure and really understand where your loss is coming from. And the significance of where it is relates to the particular type of harvest you got and how it spreads and throws. So you want to really understand your rotor loss and your sieve loss that's coming out the back. And Ben will talk about how you measure front loss. But you also want to do some work looking at your feeder house potentially there. So that's the magnetic tray here. Magnetic trays are temporarily put onto your axle or your front. Don't leave them on there. They're only a temporary while you're doing the measure. Get your chaser bin driver to do the tests and then chuck it back in and allow the harvester to keep going. And in terms of that, you can also, as I mentioned, you can put them on your header front. I mean, Cassie, you've got some pretty strong views on losses and harvest loss management. You've had a lot of experience. Do you want to give us some commentary?
Yep. If you go back to, I think it's your next slide, mate. If you go back, yeah, that one there.
That one there.
That one there on the ground. Just something that I've seen in the past, and I can see there's some faces that I know in the crowd there where I've probably been doing this job for. When the pan is on the ground like that, I would say pick it up, take it to the ute, keep in mind which side is left, which side is right, pick it up, pick all the straw and all the big pieces out of it. And then without tipping the pan over, I know that you're going to tip all the material into your little blower there next to you. Without tipping the pan over, just take all the big stuff out and see whether you can get a measure of where all the material or where all the grain is sitting in the pan, whether it's more to the left or more to the right. I've seen it sometimes. There's, your clean grain auger might overflow. So you'll see all the grain sitting in the right-hand side of that pan. Or you might have a leak in your machine, so you can see it in the right-hand side of the pan. So get it, before you chuck it into your blower, have a good look of where it is. That gives you a bit of idea of where to go to on the machine itself. With a slide that Pete's got there about the one that you've put on the header front, I've used that quite a bit, that fella there, to see what losses you get towards the end of the front, and this comes through the spreaders. So go through to the end of it, have a look, and that's the way that you can determine what's coming through your spreaders, spreading it that wide. Another important thing to keep in mind is if you pick your tray up, have a look what's underneath your tray. Like that was an eye-opener for me the first few times that I've used the tray, to see how much grain is sitting at the bottom of the tray. Because in the old days, you'll scratch, you'll blow, take a hat, blow all the straw away. You can have a look what's sitting on the ground and then go and make an adjustment and see whether it changes or not. Like the 20 grains per hand palm or whatever. That was my measurement that I used to use. We've got to keep in mind that losses are coming from a lot of different places. You've got pre-harvest losses. So there's already grain on the ground without you even being in the paddock, whether it's with wind or rain or hail or whatever. So we've got our pre-harvest losses, front losses, leakage, rotors, sieves. So we need to determine where it's coming from before we can make a adjustment. So as soon as you pick that pan up, have a look what's sitting at the bottom of it. That is something that's out of your control. You can't do anything about that. So yeah, determine where it's coming from, and then we can make adjustments.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about what sort of adjustments you can make. You've heard me talk briefly about just simple elements, but you first got to understand where it's coming from. When you get that measurement, the key is being able to quickly get a sample out and allow the header driver to keep going. And what the feedback I'm getting is either the chap, guy, woman driving the ute, or the chaser bin driver takes the separator, the little silver container you see there, blows out the sample, weighs it, and then uses it to calculate. So we've got a couple of options on what you want to do. There's free apps or calculators available. The one on screen there is one that Pete Newms has done, which you can use different trays with, different tray sizes. You can download that off the GRDC app. And there's also other ones available from, whether it's from Bushel Plus or Rod's Calc, or Cassie has made us aware of the one from the Go Harvest app from John Deere. So there's different possibilities for how you do it, but the key when you go and do this is about the cost of harvest overall, because running those machines, they're costing roughly around $500 to $700 an hour. I think that's right, Ben?
Yeah, that's right. Anywhere between $500 and $700 an hour, and you've probably got to take into account the fact that there's additional costs for the chaser, etc. as well. So all of that time in the paddock is pretty expensive time. So yeah, work on $500 to $700 for a new harvester.
So that's a lot of dollars. So when you're looking, say, on the Bushel Plus one, you can see that the cost you're getting, the same with your Harvest Calc, and you can see what your costs are going to be, but you want to be able to measure and capture what you're doing, so you've got a reference to go back to in terms of what am I setting. So once you make your changes, you've got a reference in terms of your sieves and concaves and fans you can go back to. And you can send that then to who you've got that as a reference to go back to for your next paddock or your next crop you're going to be doing, or sending it to the header driver for the next day, so they know what they should be doing. From a harvest weed seed control perspective, we're going to talk about that later. You'll have the guys there from Seed Terminator, plus of course you got the guru in Michael Walsh coming in to talk about some of the research that's been done to give us an overview. But we know there is a strong link between, if we are losing harvest, we got harvest losses in terms of seed, and we're doing harvest weed seed control, we're going to have an issue, because we're going to be blowing our weed seeds out in our rota. Maybe, can I just find out who's doing harvest weed seed control? Can I get a bit of a show of hands? What have we got there, Tom?
I've got Terminators. John, what do you got? Windrow burning down the front.
HSD.
An IHSD, Harrington. Yep. Yuck Right Mills. At the back. IHSD as well. We've got a couple of Harringtons here, which is good. We've got another Harrington all week, which is nice.
That's
Finally,
good.
Effective.
Yeah.
First year, this year. It'll be effective. John, has only got, you know, what, 7 your Terminator?
One machine's done 3, 2 for the other one.
Yeah, one machine's done 3, one's done 2. Yep.
Okay. What about chaff lining? Anyone doing chaff lining?
Windrow burning, anyone chaff lining? Not here.
Anybody got chaff carts?
Chaff cards.
No, further south.
Yep.
Tram lining, chaff decks. No,
we've got them all
we're
here.
mills. We're mill land, aren't we? Okay, so remember Ben's comment around fires and mills. It's important that we're blowing down more, so really critical. But I think you're going to get some really good stuff from the guys on mills today. But the important I wanted to say, in terms of mills, we're able to measure the losses with mills, and you can use those pans as ways to divert it. Oh, I've got a lovely screen merge going on there. And within both the calc that's Pete Newms has done, you've got chop, spread and chaff lining elements. You'll have to play with the mill one. I think you're going to have to use the chaff lining one. Within the Bushel Plus app, it actually breaks it down depending on your mill system. So you can actually choose your calculation method there. As I've mentioned earlier, there's the at-harvest loss app. I'm going to be smashing you guys to make sure you try and get online and just listen what's going on there, be part of that conversation, because there's some good stories that are coming through, but we also want your stories of what you do in terms of sharing any changes you do and see a change, whether it's good or working or whether it isn't. I know that there's some guys from last year who got a lot of feedback that enabled them to improve what they did. And we've got some more articles available. The last one is also available through the GRDC website. There's articles 2 from last year, Harvester Forums. The guy on screen, you'll all know, Ray Harrington. There's a few other guys who've given their stories of what they did following on from last year's forums. And there's some good insights available there. So what have we learned? We know all the harvest, all the colours work. We also know they can also lose grain, and therefore it's up to us to be able to make the changes relative to our crop, our conditions and our environment. As you guys said earlier, is we know there's weather coming. What am I going to do that it's going to maximize my requirements? So being able to make those decisions. So maximizing your opportunities. We strongly recommend you measure in the mode you harvest. So if you're going to go windrowing, measuring windrow. If you're going to spread, measure in spread. If you're milling, you're going to have to divert. You've got your diversion on your seed terminator, and the guys will talk through that. Your IHSD, you've got your diverts on there as well. Can I just ask, is any one of the IHSD guys, are they use the divert and the stone trap door to do a measure, to divert and do that?
Yep. Any comments on it? No. Wasn't too bad. They are handy things because you can get an idea of where you're losing grain from the machine. So if you do a drop pan when you're running the mill, theoretically, you're destroying every seed that's going through it. The only full grains you find in your pan after that, you come from your separation area. And if you bypass, you can tell what's coming through the mill system. So through your shaft fraction, which is a handy thing to do. Correct, Pete?
So Tom's comment is essential when you're using mills. This element of being able to understand not just my losses. So if I've got rotor loss, undoubtedly what I'm doing is I'm not maximizing my mill. Firstly, there's going to be wheat seed going out there. So we want to be able to maximize that investment by putting that wheat seed in the right place and putting that grain in the right place. The reason you then do the divert, and we know we had Tim Harrington who was showing us the IHSD's latest prototype. He said he was doing the divert and doing measurements. He said, yes, I know there's some change to the airflow, but what it showed him was if I was getting grain going through there and my weed seed, I could see what happened. Otherwise it's milled to death. I can't see it. But by using the divert, which now it's got an actuator on, he could see whether he was chucking grain in there, because it is grain that wears your mills outside of sand, which is going to wear it the most. The outside of that, this grain is going to wear your mills out. So I've got 3 reasons to do it. 1, I want to put more grain in my bin. 2, I want my wheat seeds to go through my mills. And 3, I don't want grain to go through my mills because that's going to wear them faster. So if you're not measuring and you do it using mils, I think you've got 3 really good reasons to do it. So have a think about it. If you want to know more about how to do it, chat to the guys at Seed Terminator, talk to Brian there. More than happy to talk further. So when we do these changes, Cassie, when we do a change, what should we do?
Yep, we do one thing at a time. I've seen it over the years where you think, yep, I know what's going on here. I'll change my rotor speed, and I'll also do some changes on the concaves. And then you work down 60 meters down the paddock and you do a drop tray test again, and you can see, oh shit, it's actually got worse than what it was 10 minutes ago. And then you start scratching your head, see which one did I do that made it worse. So what you need to do then is you need to
Hang on, Kathy, we've lost it, mate.
Is he on the bottom going, Pete?
we get our seed that's bad, that's going to go out anyway. We take that off, we throw that away. The cracked grain, we need to look after the cracked grain because that's grain that can go into your tank. So we need to look after your cracked grain as well. So I would measure that and say, for instance, just a sample, maybe I'll get 10 grams of grain in my tray. We'll go and do a change on the machine. We'll go and do the drop tray again. And then we'll say, all right, we've got 6 grams in the tray. So we know, okay, that adjustment is in the right direction. But if it goes up, if we get 15 grams of grain in the tray, right, we know we need to do either set it back to where it was or do some other changes on it.
That's great. That's absolutely right. And what we try and look at too is then, as you've told us, is if you're getting a change that's also making your sample dirty, is trying to understand what I'm going to do to do that. We don't want to polish the sample because you're not going to get penalized for it, but then don't do it. So we then look at what's going to make a change to do that. But the gain is to increase that productivity. We do not want you to slow down. And rarely have I seen growers actually use the slowing down as the means to resolve losses, because these beasts need to be fed. They are hungry monsters, and the better you feed them, the better they operate, the better they run. And I know you guys know that. In terms of what we then do, we then need to go and calibrate those loss monitors, go into the system. Once you've made your change, and once you've set it, is actually go in, and so you've got the ability to use those monitors to track where you're at. As the guys reminded us yesterday, if you make a change, then in the header, the monitors are then going to let you know if your losses are dramatically changing, but you won't know to what quantitative state, how much has that affected it. It will tell you if it's extreme. So if you change the fan and your monitor starts to go wider than you want, you know you're losing more than you're anticipating, and that may be a good time to go and do another test. Or if you've got a change in conditions and you see a spike on your monitor happening, I know a guy who was running his class headers he was in canola. He was seeing that he knew he was losing 70 grams, 70 kilograms a hectare, and he was quite comfortable where he's at, and he's averaging about 3 tons of canola. Then he saw his monitors spike, and he was later in the day, and he's going, do I keep going? And he did a quick test, got his chaser bin driver to do a test, so his quantitative change was 270 kilograms. He just stopped. He said, look, stop, time to stop now. The wind changes come in, I may as well just pull it up now and we'll do the blowdown. So it's putting you in a position to make that change, because in the end, where we know we calibrate the seeders, I'm sure you guys all calibrate your seeders, but you only have one chance to harvest. We want you to maximize that harvest opportunity. The GRDC have provided, through Pete Newms and Marcel Cringe, access online to some goals And again, these are goals or benchmarks you're aiming for. As I heard one of you guys say, if the weather's changing, you're going to be thinking about what those conditions are. But this gives you an idea of what you're aiming towards and what you're trying to reduce. Do you guys have many problems with mice last year or this year?
Any mice getting around here? A little bit, not too much. Interested to know.
Yeah. A little bit? Okay.
Sorry, Pete. Those guys who are using
That's
harvest weekend control, have you noticed any difference in the mice infestations in your paddocks? Guys?
Yeah, they're right.
Yeah.
Less mice.
A lot less mice. No feed. Can't feed them. Yeah,
No feed and feed.
that's right. Just tiny little sheep, aren't they? Just don't look after. Can't get the fences good enough to keep them in. Yeah, Pete. Not as much mice here as there was in other parts of the country.
So good to do that. I know there's some feedback from some of the other guys that have seen that where people are spending the time doing the measurements and taking that 1% time to actually make those changes, they were seeing less mice than and also those who are doing harvest weed seed control. So you're really, same as you're doing with harvest weed seed control, you're not saying I've got lots of weeds, therefore I've got to do harvest weed seed control. I'm going to start with doing this to stop weeds coming and being a barrier now, so build the walls today against the mice. If you're dropping grain, you're feeding mice, and they don't need a lot of grain per day for you to be able to end up with a problem. So just thought I'd raise that. So look, I'll hand back to you, Tom. If anybody's got any questions, please get in touch. You've got Brian there. Please chat to Brian, and if you've got any questions, he's the best guy there to talk to, and he'll happily come out and come and chat on farm too. Okay, back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks very much. Anyone got any questions for Pete before we move on? I'll reiterate a couple of things that you said I think are very important. The first thing is that you've got to understand acceptable losses and your cost of harvest. So your cost of harvest is the cost of the case is to operate your machine, which is at $500 to $700 an hour, which is a heck of a lot of money, plus your losses. So we did have a thing before where it said that there was one guy going at 12 tonne an hour, and he losing 20 kilo at the back. When he pumped it up to 20 tonne an hour, he's losing 60 kilos. But for him, that was an acceptable loss increase because he can go a little bit faster and get more out of his machine. So that harvest Calcat will give you that information. There's a mic behind you, John, if you want to.
Only when you finish,
Yeah.
and Peter, just a question, really quick question. We've got a Bushel Plus trailer that we bought. So the issue is for us is in the canola, it's fine because we're windrow burning all that canola, so that goes in a row, we stick it under the row, like back axle. But in cereals, we're not, we're spreading it. So where's the best spot to put the tray? If you just put it under the axle, are you going to get an accurate assessment there, or do we need to put it out on the cone? Because I've never thought of that before.
Depends what you want to measure.
What's your header?
I mean, obviously, a couple of cables. We have 4 headers in the paddock. A John Deere John Deere and New Holland are 2 cases. So our headers are the 2 cases. They're only 230s. So that's what we're using. So I've never thought about putting it out wider. We just always put it under the back axle when we're spreading the residue.
You should check a few spots.
Yeah. Check a few spots, John. There's Keegan saying at the back here. You check in your front, just stop before the spreader goes over it. So drop it, stop it. You understand what's coming off your front. You put it on the middle of the front, stop before you get over as well, pull it out. Have a look over there.
Sweet spot too when you're spreading grain out the back, because it's how it works. You find probably the grain will sit more in one sort of section. So if you just drop it behind the axle, you only actually understand what portion of your grain is just sitting there. So you've got to really measure a couple of spots along your whole squad to work out where you think your grain loss is. And then that way, because obviously if you put your thing 4 meters across, you've got you might have 80% of your grain loss throw out to that width. And you might think, oh, I'm losing 200 kilos, but you're only actually losing 100 kilos. So understanding where the grain loss is and then balancing it out across your whole width is important too.
Taking the mic.
you can actually,
Start again, Brian, if you can.
if you, within your app, you can actually do 2 tests. You can actually, on the one test, you can do 2 weight. So you can put the tray under the axle, you go and put it on the side of the cones, and it'll tell you, it'll run through how to test it. And you can, if you've got more on your frame or more stuff going over the rotor, you can work out the percentage of what that loss is when you do the final test. If you haven't got that, the new pack, tell you all about that.
And a good point there is that these Bushel Plus guys, Rod Grewal from Harvest Scout, they're investing money continuously back into improving their system. So the Bushel Plus is getting updated all the time. You can now choose the seed terminator right at the stairs that add onto your header, so it actually calculates for you without doing any of that work. So you don't go check your spread and all that sort of stuff. That's anything you use to have a measure on those trays is actually how far you spread into your at the back. So it's a really important point. They are continuously improving their system, which is a good thing to see. The other thing we want to touch on just really quickly is it is important to understand when you pick those trays up to look underneath them. Because that's, you're seeing then what your non-manageable losses are. So some things you just can't manage. You can't manage terrain, you can't manage the wind, you can't manage where your crop variety is. Some things you just lose. But if you're getting it in the front, you should be trying to keep it in your bin. That's the most important thing.
But
Yeah.
it's a bit late for this harvest.
Give him the mic.
It's a bit late for this harvest, but after harvest, go and look where your volunteers are. You'll see patterns in the paddock. You'll see single rotor machines will have more grain loss on one side of this block than the other. And that'll give you a good idea for next year when you go into the paddock. Oh, this is where I should put in my tray.
So what we're going to do is just take a quick break here to go give you guys
One more question, Tom.
Oh.
My question, Peter, is you set your machine up, your fan speed for what you think's right in the morning, say, and it's 25 degrees, and then by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's nearly 40 degrees. So obviously your air is thinner. How much does that affect the performance of the fan through the cleaning area?
Cassie, can I ask you to comment on that one? Because I think we chatted a little about this.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But yeah, it does influence quite a fair bit. The way that you set the machine up at 11 o'clock in the morning when you start, and at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and at 11 at night, all those things are different because your circumstances change, your temperature change, your moisture that's in the plants. As soon as the sun goes down, the moisture starts coming in. So there's definitely changes that you need to do. You've got to work out the primarily time that you're going to harvest, whether it's from 2 in the afternoon till 9 o'clock at night. You can set your machine up for that. You know that's the optimum range that you're going to work in because that's the most of hours that you're going to spend in the machine is between, say, 2 in the afternoon and 9 at night. So you can set your machine up there. Concaves, wind and rotor speed, yep, definitely need to adjust it during the day as your circumstances change. If you have a look, I don't know who's there who's got the automation on the John Deere header. When you run it in the automation mode where the machine is doing everything for you, if you look down at that screen, you would think that the circumstances are fine it's exactly the same as what it is now, as what it was 10 minutes ago. But if you look down on that screen, you'll see that machine is making changes all the time, whether it's the rotor or the wind or the sieves, it keeps on making changes. And you as an operator that needs to make those changes, you sit there, you make maybe 3 or 4 or 5 an hour, that machine will do 300 an hour. It never stops changing. So yes, definitely as the temperature changes, you need to make changes.
And I think that's an important point that you've got to make the changes. Can you see my screen at the moment?
No, I can see you.
See me, just bear a sec.
So
you should be able to see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, so to answer your question, yes, as Cassie said, it's going to vary according to the time of day. What I've learned from other growers is what they do is they work out critical times of day, as Cassie said. So they've got their their morning setting, they've got their afternoon setting, got their evening setting for canola. And why I've chucked this up on screen is that they then are saving what those settings are in terms of their change, but they're doing the measure. They've got a measure and a setting for the time of day that they then refer back to. And that means they've got a reference. So it's having a reference and saying, right, I'm going to be going with that as my guide for first thing in the morning. I'm going that as my guide for the 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is my guide for where we go 7 o'clock in the evening as the moisture comes in again. So they've got a guide and they've got settings they can refer back to, and they save those as 3 settings, and they just do a measure. Let's do a measure as we go into a new crop. Let's do a measure as I go into a new paddock. Does that make sense?
Measure as the condition changes. If you're not using the app like that and you are measuring, text from the window.
You got a reference to go back to. That's what it's about. Does that answer your question?